Hello, this is Jeff Hammond with Geo-Flo Products Corporation. Today we're doing a webinar on the Hydroconnect tank, and the webinar will be hosted by Kyle Smith. We'll be talking about some new products. This webinar is part of a three-part series. Today we'll be talking about the Hydroconnect system and the many options available, as well as controls, applications, and some overall features and benefits of the Hydroconnect system. The next webinar will talk about buffer tank selection and controls, and then we'll move on to pump selection and pressure drop calculations as the third part in this series. If you have any questions in between, Enertech's inside sales team can be reached at 618-664-9010. It's important in a webinar to take notes, ask questions, and do your research and review. All of this information is recorded so you can revisit the webinar at your leisure. Let's get started with Hydroconnect. A little bit of background on the Hydroconnect system. It was built from many customer requests for a solution that doesn't restrict pump placement. In some systems, the pumps must be placed on the tank itself, but it's not always the most convenient location. And so the Hydroconnect system gives you the flexibility to put the pumps where they look best and function the best in the mechanical room. It also provides viable cooling options. One of the challenges with any hydronic system, especially with heat pumps, is finding controls that handle the cooling option properly. Outdoor temperature reset was an important portion of the project, as we have lower water temperatures with milder outdoor air temperatures. Then we have better heat pump COPs, so that really increases system efficiency. And easy to keep in inventory means that modular design and fewer components that can be mixed minimizes SKUs, so inventory is in stock more often for contractors, and it makes it easier for inventory for distributors and manufacturers. We want to make sure that the system can work with both radiant floor and fan coil systems. That was one of the design criteria. Providing a central point for all wiring makes installation easier, and it's much easier also later on to troubleshoot the system. The new system includes application material that is pretty comprehensive, as well as a calculator that's online for buffer tank sizing. To give you an idea of what Hydroconnect is and what Hydroconnect is not, these bullet points give you a fairly good understanding, hopefully, of what the design goals were. First off, Hydroconnect is an integrated buffer tank solution. So we combine the best of many features from different vendors into one system. Like I said earlier, it's not easy to find a system that includes cooling, and so in some cases we have to use several different vendors to come up with a system that works. It's an easy installation for experienced contractors. It's a big labor savings and installation time savings, but also for new contractors who don't have a lot of experience with hydronics, the controls is certainly the most challenging, and so Hydroconnect makes the control system much easier. Now, Hydroconnect is not really an all-encompassing solution, so it won't handle every conceivable application. The so-called wet heads, or the specialists in hydronics, will possibly find that Hydroconnect is somewhat limiting, and so it may not work for every application. But really the rationale is to find a system that can handle most of the options. We think about 80% or so, and installation time will be alleviated as a result, and so it will handle most of them, but it's certainly not an all-encompassing solution. Some of the features you can see on this slide: the Hydroconnect tank in black with the blue control panel. This is the typical application, but the control panel could be mounted remotely. You'll see on the left-hand side, option 1 is the variable speed option, and because the tank is a separate piece from the pumping system, the pumping is a modular design. You can choose either variable speed or constant speed pumps. With option 1, you'll see the variable speed pump, and that's coupled with zone valves, which we'll show on a slide later on. On the lower left-hand corner, option 2 would include insulated pumps for each of the zones. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see an insulated pump labeled "Pumps for Heat Pump Load Side." That pumps the fluid from the heat pump over to the buffer tank. So this would be a typical system. Let's talk about HydroConnect options. There are 3 versions of controls: a heating-only control for typically radiant systems, a heating and cooling version, which allows both radiant zones and fan coil zones. And then there's a third option that is heating cooling with one fan coil zone. And the advantage to that is the simplicity of wiring and also transformer isolation, but it does have some limitations that we'll have to look at. So it's one of those systems where you might be able to certainly simplify the system as long as you can live with those limitations. The controls can be purchased separately from the tank or with the tank. Regardless of which control version you go with, all versions include outdoor temperature reset, cold weather shutdown, and warm weather shutdown, which stops conditioning the tank when the temperature is mild. That's an energy saving feature. Otherwise, the tank is going to be conditioned as chilled water or hot water. Central wiring is a feature that all 3 options include. So the thermostats, heat pump, and zone valves or pumps are all wired to a central location. Up to 3 stages of heating and 2 stages of cooling is available. And that includes a backup boiler, so that we can choose a system that might be less loop requirements and maybe smaller heat pump as a result. The displays are full color displays, including an indication for heating and cooling demand, operation mode, and your input and output statuses, as well as external indicator lights for zone operations so that you can see which zone is calling. The zone board is set up for either pumps or zone valves, and the zone valves have several different configurations. If we're looking at variable speed pumping, that's available with one of the zone panel options and does have connections for zone valves. As the zone valves open and close, the variable speed pump then increases or decreases in speed. The pump exercise option is for zoning with pumps. It occasionally energizes the pump so that if it's a heating only system, for example, those pumps don't seize up if they're sitting idle for a long period of time. And the zone board does have fusing available. So a lot of features with all 3 of the versions. Let's take a look at the components that make up HydroConnect. The tank is stainless steel. It's 14 gauge 316 stainless, and it's fully encapsulated in a powder coated steel cabinet. That allows us to have 2 inches of foam insulation, including under the tank. We have a design that allows that tank to sit up off from the bottom and allows foam to be underneath the tank itself. So that will certainly help with any kind of chilled water application. It's not as necessary for hot water, although it does help with tank losses. But on chilled water, we're concerned about condensation, and that 2-inch foam insulation is very helpful for condensation. Connections are 1.5-inch female pipe thread. We also have a well for the thermistor, for the bulb that senses temperature of the tank. It's a drain connection, and then at the top is the connection for the expansion tank and air vent. It does include an air vent vacuum breaker with the package, but the expansion tank and the other hydronic accessories are field supplied. As far as controls go, as I mentioned earlier, there really isn't one control that does the entire job, especially for heat pump systems. So we're combining what we think are the best of both worlds with an HBX tank controller and a Taco zone board. The HBX tank controller is an Eco 550. It acts as our aquastat, but has additional features as mentioned earlier, such as warm weather shutdown and outdoor temperature reset. The Taco zone panel is really a nice panel for either zone valves or pumps, but it's designed for heating. So with the addition of discrete relays, then we can make this into a system that handles both heating and cooling, and the switchover accordingly. We've taken all those components then with wiring harnesses and factory assembled everything into a box, and then included terminal strips for all the low voltage connections. You'll see a picture in the lower right hand corner of the terminal strips that are available on the control box. So all of the components listed here are factory wired. It's a modular approach. We can use either pumps or zone valves, and it's a matter of selecting the appropriate number and size of pumps or zone valves accordingly. When we're zoning with zone valves, in other words, a variable speed system, you'll see a system that looks similar to this. The green zone valves towards the middle and on the top of the slide, those are only showing 3 valves or 3 zones at this point. We could have up to 6 zones. And each one of those zones, each one of those radiant manifolds, in the case of a radiant system, or each fan coil, if we had fan coils per zone, would have a zone valve that's going to turn on and off based on that zone's call from the thermostat. The variable speed pump just below that header is designed for differential pressure. So as the zone valves open and close, the pump speeds up and slows down. And that allows us to dial in the exact flow rate based on the number of zones calling. This is certainly the most efficient way to go. With a hydronic system like this, the pump will only deliver the flow necessary for each of those zones. Likewise, if we're zoning with circulators, it also only delivers the flow for that zone. However, we have a lot more watts required when we're zoning with pumps individually rather than a variable speed pump with zone valves. That gives us the advantage of better efficiency. So either method is certainly a good way to go. It's more of a matter of the application itself and the goals from a standpoint of efficiency when we're looking at the hydronic side of the equation. This is what the control panel looks like. You can see here the green Takeo zone board, the HBX controller on the right, and then in the middle of that control box are the factory installed relays, as well as the wiring harnesses. So the end result is that all the connections are down at the bottom. In this case, we have the zone panel that has 1 fan coil zone and 5 radiant zones. There are other versions as well, but they all have similar connections so that all of the connections are made at the bottom, and the factory wiring greatly simplifies the system. We've decided to use zone 1 as the master thermostat if it's a heating and cooling panel, and that will determine whether the tank is heated or cooled, unless the warm weather shutdown or cold weather shutdown tells it that it's not necessary. I won't go into a lot of details on the control wiring, but this is just one example of the low voltage controls. Here you see the heating only system. All of the thermostats are connected to the control panel, as well as the heat pump, and in this case we're showing an optional backup boiler. So you can see here the ease of installation with all of the components being connected together at the central location. Here's an example 4-zone heating and cooling panel. This has fan coils on the left-hand side and the master thermostat zone 1 that determines whether the system is in heating or cooling, as well as another thermostat for a heating cooling fan coil zone. And then you'll see towards the middle 2 radiant zones. Those are heating only thermostats. And at the far right then we have our heat pump connections. In this case it's a 2-stage heat pump and also capable of heating and cooling. The simplest panel, like I mentioned, the most limiting, but certainly simplest from an installation standpoint, has complete transformer isolation. So this is the 1 fan coil cooling zone. It would be typical of a home with 1 fan coil that is ducted for the cooling in the home, and then up to 5 radiant heating zones. So with this setup, we still have zone 1 as our master thermostat, and that also handles cooling, and then all of the other zones are heating only radiant zones. So the customer always knows exactly how the system operates. 1 thermostat for cooling and the other thermostats for heating. And also there's not a need to have to manually switch over the system at the mechanical room. That zone 1 thermostat tells the buffer tank controls whether it's in heating or cooling. So it makes certainly the most turnkey option available. Enertech's combo unit works well with HydroConnect. This is one option showing details for a forced air heating and cooling zone in zone 1 and the other 5 radiant zones. Or we could use this with floor warming. We might have heating and cooling from the combo unit, and the other zones are for warm floors. Another good option with the Enertech combo unit is HydroConnect in this configuration where we have 6 zones of radiant and we have 1 forced air cooling zone. This takes advantage of the combo features, being able to supply forced air cooling and then switch over and be used as a water-to-water unit for heating the tank as well. Online, you'll find a buffer tank calculator. This is on the Geo-Flo website. It's geo-flo.com. And when you click on the Design Calculators link, you'll see the home page for the calculators. The buffer tank calculator will determine the buffer tank sizing based upon the input for heat pump and system information. Here's a screenshot from that buffer tank calculator. There are two parts. The top part is for heating, the bottom part is for chilled water or cooling. The calculator then picks the larger of the two and will determine the buffer tank size. And you can see at the bottom of the slide, in this example, it's asking for 31 gallons. And so that would be the minimum requirement for this particular application. The next webinar actually goes into detail on buffer tank sizing. So the size that's available currently is one size. It's 50 gallons, and the reason 50 gallons was picked is because that is typical for 7 to 8 tons if the water-to-water heat pump is a single-speed machine, or if it's a 10-ton unit and it has 2 compressors or 2 stages, then the buffer tank is still 50 gallons is still appropriate. So one size handles really a wide variety of applications. It's larger than what we might need for, say, a 3-ton heat pump, but it certainly doesn't hurt anything to have a little bit more storage. The buffer tank itself then is much more universal for other systems. As I mentioned, the buffer tank calculator does 2 calculations, one for heating and one for cooling, and the larger of the 2 is used. If for some reason a larger tank or a smaller tank is needed, the controls can be purchased separately from the HydroConnect system. The tank and the controls can be purchased separately. So then let's look at pump selection. I mentioned it's a modular system. So we have the buffer tank, we have the controls. Those can be purchased together or separately. And then we need a pump for the heat pump load side, the water-to-water or combo unit, to pump from the heat pump over to the buffer tank. In this case, we have a number of different choices. In the picture here on the left-hand side, you can see a typical insulated pump. That's a single-speed pump. This one actually 3-speed, but constant speed. With isolation valves, we can go with a variable speed pump, larger pumps. So there's a variety of different pumps from the load side over to the buffer tank. On the hydronic side, whether it be radiant floor or fan coils, we can go with the premium system, which is variable speed in this case. We have a Magna 3 pump that would deliver flow to the various zones, and we'll choose a motorized valve based upon the zone manifold or the fan coil unit. When we set the system up initially, we would open all of the zone valves and set the Magna 3 maximum pressure. That gives us the flow rate when all of the zone valves are open. As the system is operating, then the zone valves are opening and closing, and the pump is speeding up and slowing down accordingly. The zone panel actually has a switch that enables the pump anytime there's a call from any zone. Alternatively, we could certainly use pumps per zones instead of using a solenoid valve or a motorized zone valve and a variable speed pump. In this case, we do have a bit of a limitation on pumps, and that's primarily because we need to make sure that we're using a pump that's rated for chilled water. Some of the Grundfos pumps are not rated for chilled water, for example, the UP15 series. So we are offering one that will work both with hot water and chilled water. The main difference is chilled water pumps include coated windings and also weep holes for condensate. So the same pumps that we would use in the ground loop system are applicable for chilled water systems. We do have to make sure that we're using a pump that's rated accordingly versus a boiler pump, which is really not rated for chilled water. We're continuing to look at other options for the chilled water side. So questions are being asked now at the sidebar. Just type in your questions. If there are any other upcoming projects, make sure you contact Enertech's Inside Sales Department. And in fact, Enertech has a design services team. It's free and will help coordinate larger jobs that might need some assistance, or maybe more complicated systems, hydronics, and so forth. You can watch this webinar again on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/Enertech Manufacturing. We do have new webinars coming up, and we'll build on this webinar with additional information about HydroConnect, plus there'll be other webinars in 2016. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, certainly contact Enertech, and they will be happy to help out. Thanks again.